And Rishi Sunak is on the brink of completing a new deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Now, the Prime Minister held a conference call for Cabinet Ministers and is expected to make a statement to the House of Commons tomorrow.
Well, the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, said the deal between Great Britain and Northern Ireland was inching towards a conclusion. But what could that conclusion look like for Northern Ireland? Well, here to talk to us this morning is Brexit campaigner Suzanne Evans. And down the line, we've got political commentator Dr. John Coulter. Good morning to you both, and thank you both for your company. Suzanne, I'm going to start with you. How optimistic is it for us to think there could be a new deal on the table by Monday?
Well, I think everybody, of course, wants to be optimistic about this. I mean, we've had a stalemate in the Northern Ireland government for many years now as a result of this issue. Nobody wants to threaten the Good Friday peace agreement, but it's going to be a very difficult deal to pull off. You've got to please the DUP, you've got to please the EU, you've got to please the European Reform Group, a group of Tory backbenchers. There are rumours this morning that the Northern Ireland Minister, Steve Baker, is on resignation watch. It's going to be a very difficult one to pull off. There are so many legal issues here. There are so many emotional issues. So it'd be very interesting. Obviously, Rishi Sunak and Number 10 are trying to say that this deal is practically done. They can please all sides. There's certainly a lot of talk about, positive talk about it. But ultimately, we've got to wait and see. It looks like the announcement might be tomorrow. Apparently, Conservative MPs have been told to turn up at the House tomorrow. A cabinet call has been scheduled, we hear. But ultimately, we've just got to wait and see and then see what the response is to it.
OK. John, what do you think? I mean, key to this, obviously, is the DUP being happy.
Yes, well, good morning, folks. Basically, this agreement is somehow been called the Windsor Agreement. But there's the real danger if Sunak cannot sell this to the DUP and especially to the ERG, that it will effectively become the Munich Agreement Mark II, and we all know how that ended up. This is basically a very political high-stakes poker game that Sunak has got himself involved in. And his ace card is going to have to be the phrase, sell, sell, sell. And as was said earlier, it's got to be sold to the DUP, the hard right of the DUP, because the bottom line is this: if it can't be sold to the DUP, if they reject and it doesn't meet their so-called 7 tests, well, the bottom line is that's devolution, that's the Stormont Assembly flushed down the toilet for another generation. So basically the big problem is that Sunak faces is it seems that the EU cannot get it through the referendum result of 2016, and it still has a claw on the jugular vein of democracy in the UK. So what this deal has got to do is to remove that EU claw from the jugular vein of British democracy.
And, John, what would you like to see in this new deal for Northern Ireland? I mean, just looking at the context of all of this, I mean, I think there's been a 6th arrest now in the shooting of that off-duty police officer in Omagh this week. And that is a reminder, isn't it, of what is central to all of this, because the new IRA is at the centre of that force's investigation over in Northern Ireland. That's not to say that they are responsible, but they are, of course, being investigated. But it is a reminder, isn't it, of what is central to all of this, which is peace in Northern Ireland, and that does need to be at the centre of any negotiation that's taking place.
Yes, let's cut to the chase here. What is really on the line is the future of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Here we are, a matter of weeks away from the Silver Jubilee, the 25th anniversary of that famous agreement. And what we're looking at is potentially the gun is back in Irish politics again. We thought that that peace process would get the gun out of Irish politics, because the big worry is that if the politicians cannot reach a deal which restores devolution, which restores the Northern Ireland Assembly and the power-sharing executive, the real fear is that the hard men on both sides, especially in the loyalist community, will say, move over politicians, it's our turn. And that's what we need to avoid. We must keep the this whole negotiation process. We must keep this deal well and truly within the democratic process. We cannot afford to go back to the days of the Troubles, and we must remember somewhere in the region of 3,000 lives were lost over the course of those Troubles. That must never, ever happen again.
Politically, we've got to be realistic, Suzanne, haven't we, in all of this? There surely can be no way that this is still being worked on and will be presented as a done deal tomorrow if the DUP aren't happy, because that would almost be political suicide for the Prime Minister, wouldn't it?
It would indeed, and indeed the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has said that there's not going to be any deal that isn't backed by the DUP. So, the DUP have 7 red lines. They've stated there 7 clear issues that if the deal doesn't meet those issues, they're not going to back it. And the situation that John's just so lucidly outlined is back at the forefront of our politics again in Northern Ireland. So let's see what they have to say. The 7 red lines that the DUP have, they're quite tough ones. They involve, no legal route for the European Court of Justice in trade and customs in Northern Ireland. And at the moment, that's not the case. So is the EU prepared to back the peace process to the extent that it's going to completely back out of this issue or not? It's hard to imagine that it might. But again, we'll just have to wait and see what the deal actually says and what the DUP's response is to it. But it is tenterhook stuff, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's going to be one to watch today, and hopefully we hear some more detail tomorrow. Suzanne Evans and Dr. John Coulter, thank you so much for your time this morning.